Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a stack of sources in front of us today, and they seem to converge on a really intriguing, maybe even intense idea, the year 2027.
Yeah.
Just keeps showing up in discussions about potentially massive events linked to non-human intelligence. There's this persistent buzz, a specific date that seems, significant to some of these sources.
That's right. And the material we're looking at is quite diverse. It includes sources talking about these specific predictions alongside these alleged detailed accounts of recent military operations.
Right.
And even some, insights from astronomical observations. It's a fascinating mix. You've got the vague, the concrete, and the cosmic all sort of bundled together.
Absolutely. So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear, I think. We need to sift through all these different perspectives, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, maybe the surprising facts. We really want to understand what these sources actually claim about 2027 and the bigger picture they might be painting. We're trying to see if these seemingly disparate threads connect in any meaningful way, or if they just clash.
Makes sense. Where do we start?
So let's dive right into that persistent buzz around 2027. Several sources mentioned this statement circulating that certainly something can happen in 2027. It's quite a definitive phrase, isn't it?
It is very definitive. And what's notable is that an investigative journalist, someone who has covered this field extensively, has publicly commented on hearing this date, specifically from their own sources.
Right. But here's the frustrating part. According to the sources themselves and the journalist reporting it, they explicitly state they don't know what it is. They've heard the date, but not the actual event.
That's exactly, which is odd. The journalist also mentioned hearing other dates alongside 2027, things like 2034 and even other dates much later. So 2027 isn't the only date being whispered about in certain circles, apparently, but it seems to be one of the closest and maybe the most frequently repeated one.
And who are these sources feeding this to the journalist? The material describes them as people who are urging me to be urgent, telling the journalist that people need the right to know this. Strong words.
Very strong. Yet they are reportedly constrained by their national security oaths. These legal obligations, these oaths, seem to prevent them from sharing specific, actionable details.
Yeah, and this is where one of the sources really captures that sense of listener frustration. It's palpable. If people are constrained by oaths, if they can only hint at a date without saying what it means.
Right.
Just mentioning 2027, possibly because of those constraints, simply serving to scare people. Without providing any real warning or understanding. I mean, what are you supposed to do if something is happening in 2027, but I can't tell you what?
That's a key point raised in the sources, definitely. This feeling of urgency coupled with this intense vagueness, it appears deeply linked to this idea of being on borrowed time.
Borrowed time. Wow. It sounds dramatic. What did the sources imply that phrase could mean in this context? Is it apocalyptic?
It's connected not just to potential end-of-the-world type stuff, as you might think, but also, as described in one source, maybe a more fundamental, perhaps paradigm-shifting event.
Okay.
A situation where, and this is a quote, "The world that you know it and the rules that you follow are no longer going to be relevant anymore."
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, and this could even involve potentially new groups or entities taking control or fundamentally altering society as we know it.
So it's not necessarily just, fire and brimstone, but potentially a complete societal upheaval where the existing order just becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
Okay. That gives us a sense of the weight attached to this rather vague 2027 prediction.
Yeah, it certainly does.
So, okay, given this buzz and that heavy feeling of borrowed time, what could this something big in 2027 potentially mean, according to the various theories circulating within these sources? Right. What are people speculating?
Well, the interpretations really run the gamut. Some suggest it's related to the actual evidence and announcement of non-human intelligence. Basically, official public disclosure, the big reveal.
Right. And one source even refers to a past claim from a contact of theirs who reportedly stated that 2027 was specifically the date when NHI was going to reveal themselves to humanity.
Yes, that specific claim is mentioned. But then on the other hand, some sources present a much darker possibility that it could be a fake alien invasion staged by the government.
A fake invasion? Seriously? Yeah. That sounds pretty wild. Why would a source suggest the government would stage something like that? Especially if, as we might get to, there are hints of real threats.
Well, the reasoning presented in the source is potentially to cause chaos or fear. which could then be leveraged, to justify actions like massively boosting military funding or implementing new forms of control. It's a kind of wag the dog scenario, but with aliens.
That's a pretty stark contrast to a friendly reveal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are there other possibilities mentioned regarding, like, a genuine NHI arrival?
Yes, another interpretation involves the actual arrival of an alien ship or fleet. And the sources suggest various scenarios for that arrival, too. Maybe the NHI are coming back to retrieve their craft that might already be here.
Yeah.
They might intend to invade us, or perhaps in a more hopeful scenario, they could even arrive to, befriend us and bring us into some kind of galactic camaraderie.
So the range of potential outcomes based on these theories really covers the full spectrum, from, like, hostile takeover to joining the space neighborhood.
Pretty much, yeah.
What about those other theories the investigative journalist heard linked to the 2027 date? It wasn't just NHI, right?
No, exactly. They also heard discussions about potentially cataclysmic natural events, like a pole reversal or a major asteroid impact.
Wow.
There's also concern mentioned about artificial intelligence reaching some kind of quantum level, leading to a loss of human control over AI. And even a Y2K-like technical collapse scenario was apparently floated.
It seems like 2027, at least in some circles represented by these sources, acts as a kind of focal point for all sorts of major potential disruptions.
Yeah.
Not just necessarily NHI-related ones.
Exactly. It's like a magnet for anxieties about the future. And it's really crucial to note, as some sources do, that there is significant skepticism around these specific 2027 predictions.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah, one source explicitly raises the possibility that the 2027 date could actually be used as a hoax or a lie sold to the public, perhaps to manipulate them or, again, justify certain actions.
That skepticism brings us right back to that earlier point about vagueness, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you tell the difference between a potential genuine, if oath-constrained, warning and deliberate disinformation if the message is just so unclear?
It's a huge problem, a real challenge for anyone trying to make sense of this.
Okay, now let's pivot dramatically. We've been discussing these vague predictions and circulating theories about 2027. But some of these sources contain alleged leaked reports that are, well, anything but vague. They describe specific, concrete, and frankly, quite shocking recent military engagements.
Well, this is where the material shifts gears from, speculative dates to these detailed accounts of alleged real-world conflict. One source details an operation from 2024 codenamed Stardust Intercept.
Stardust Intercept.
And it's described as a covert, multinational military response. Top secret stuff.
And the stated objective of this operation, according to the source, what were they responding to?
The objective was stated as countering hostile extraterrestrial precursor infiltration. The language used is very specific, very military.
Hostile precursor infiltration. Okay, how did this operation allegedly begin?
According to this alleged report, it started with the detection on April 15th, 2024, of 3 distinct objects. They were internally labeled Xenosubject Alpha Bravo Charlie. German designation, maybe? And these objects reportedly displayed clear signs of intelligent control and, crucially, non-human origin.
And their destination and objective, where were they going? What were they supposedly doing?
They were heading towards Earth, reportedly as part of a larger Harvest Fleet Omega precursor mission. The objective, resource exploitation.
Harvest Fleet Omega.
Yeah.
Resource exploitation.
Yeah. And the chilling detail here mentioned right in the report is that humanity was viewed simply as an obstacle to this mission, just in the way.
Wow. Okay. Does the report even detail where these objects landed or positioned themselves?
Yes, it does. Alpha reportedly landed somewhere in Siberia. Bravo was detected aiming for China, and Charlie positioned itself in the South Pacific. And the entities that emerged from these craft, they're classified as XE1 in the report. They're described as biomechanical constructs, or drones, essentially, non-organic automated units, built for a purpose.
Biomechanical drones, so not biological beings as such.
Not primarily, seems like. And what were their initial actions upon arrival? Setting up equipment, taking samples of the environment, that sort of thing?
Okay, reconnaissance.
Seems like it. But when human reconnaissance assets, like drones, approached them, the report states their reaction was immediate and hostile. They destroyed a human drone, which confirmed their aggressive intent right away.
Okay, so they shot first, basically. How did the global response forces react?
Operations were coordinated by an entity described as a precursor to something called the United Earth Defense Council, or UEDC. Sounds like a unified command structure.
Yeah.
Military engagements were launched. Alpha was successfully neutralized and recovered in Siberia. Bravo was damaged over the South China Sea and reportedly self-destructed, probably to prevent capture. Charlie, however, down in the South Pacific, was successfully boarded and captured intact. And critically, entities were captured alive from that craft.
Captured alive. Wow. So these were successful operations then, broadly speaking. But were they easy? What was the cost?
The reports are very clear on this. These operations, while achieving their objectives, involved significant human casualties. This wasn't a bloodless encounter by any means. People died.
Right. Heavy stuff. And what vital information was gained from analyzing the captured craft and these live entities?
This is a key outcome detailed in the sources. The analysis apparently confirmed the existence of a hostile, technologically superior force. No surprise there, maybe. But more importantly, it confirmed the existence of the main force that harvests Fleet Omega.
Okay.
And based on their analysis back in August 2024, this main fleet was estimated to be approximately 8 to 12 years away from Earth.
8 to 12 years. So that puts arrivals somewhere between, what, 2032 and 2036?
Roughly, yeah. That was the initial estimate from the 2024 incident.
And the secrecy surrounding all this, I imagine it was intense.
Absolutely. The sources detail absolute Geheimhaltung, that's absolute secrecy, was deemed essential. Why? To prevent global panic.
Understandable, I guess.
Cover stories were created, disinformation campaigns were reportedly implemented across various channels, and all personnel involved were placed under strict national security oaths, codenamed Silent Echo for that 2024 operation.
Silent Echo.
Okay.
That's the 2024 engagement. But the sources mention a second major encounter described in another alleged leaked report, much more recently, right?
Yes, the 2025 operation down in Antarctica, codenamed Southern Cross Vanguard. This report details a second wave detected in January 2025, this time involving 5 ships referred to internally as the Icebreaker Group.
5 ships. Were these similar in scale to the first 3 from 2024?
No, the report specifically emphasizes they were significantly larger than the 3 objects from 2024.
Bigger. Okay.
And this was interpreted, potentially, as either an escalation by the Xenos force or perhaps a deliberate test of Earth's capabilities after that first encounter, showing they could bring more.
And their target this time?
A specific mineral-rich area in Antarctica. Still focused on resources, it seems.
How prepared were human forces this time, having, faced this threat just the year before?
Apparently much more prepared. The newly formed United Earth Defense Council, the UEDC mentioned earlier, was directly involved. Forces were mobilized, but under the cover of international scientific projects in the Antarctic region. Very clandestine.
Smart cover.
Yeah. And they deployed specialized units and tech that had been rapidly developed after the 2024 encounter. The report mentions improved EMP weapons, lasers, new cyber weapons, and even specific shield breaker missiles.
Wow. Rapid development.
Seems so. And again, all under strictest secrecy. Personnel involved were under new vows, this time codenamed Frozen Silence.
Frozen Silence. Fitting for Antarctica. What were the battles like down there? That environment must have been brutal.
The report describes intense and costly engagements, yeah. A key finding from these battles was that the entities themselves demonstrated improvements, better armor, adaptive cybernetics, even specialized units. It indicates they learn and adapt based on previous encounters. They got tougher.
They adapt. That's concerning. What was the outcome of this second larger operation?
Human forces successfully neutralized and secured 4 of the 5 ships. And crucially, a significant number of live entities were captured. This time, the report specifically mentions 70.
70 live entities captured. That's a major intelligence haul, presumably?
You'd think so.
And what was the most significant strategic implication drawn from this second encounter arriving so quickly, within just a year of the first?
This is perhaps the most impactful takeaway from the second report. The rapid arrival of a second, larger wave suggested that the main fleet, Harvest Fleet Omega, might actually be arriving sooner than that initial 8-12-year estimate from 2024.
Oh.
The revised time frame discussed in the wake of this Antarctic incident was possibly only 5 to 7 years away, and that's from March 2025.
5 to 7 years from early 2025. So that brings the potential arrival window forward to roughly 2030 to 2032.
Exactly. The second engagement led to an updated, significantly earlier timeline for the arrival of the main force. That's a critical shift in the assessment, according to these sources.
Yeah, that's a huge difference. Cuts the warning time almost in half.
Pretty much.
Okay, let's turn to a completely different thread now from our source material. This one discusses astronomical observations that might also be related to NHI. This moves us beyond military encounters and specific date predictions into, well, deep space.
That's right. This source brings up something interesting, a signal initially detected years ago by the SETI at Home project, you remember that? Distributed computing looking for signals.
Vaguely, yeah. Way back.
Way back, like late 90s or early 2000s. The claim in this source is that this old signal has reportedly been cracked more recently, maybe within the last year or so.
Cracked. What does that mean in this context? What's the alleged interpretation of this decoded signal?
Well, one interpretation presented is that it's imagery, sort of like city lights from a planet that is not very far away from here.
City lights from another planet.
That's the claim. And one source specifically puts that distance at 4.9 light years, which is, practically next door in cosmic terms.
City lights detected from a planet under 5 light years away. It's an absolutely extraordinary claim reported in these sources. Just stunning if true. What else does this source discuss regarding astronomical discoveries?
It mentions a second discovery, this one based on data from the James Webb Space Telescope, much more recent.
Okay, DWST.
Reportedly, a task was given to analyze data related to a possible incoming contact, focusing on a specific object they had spotted.
An incoming contact. How is this object described?
It's described as massive, huge, but the key detail, according to the source, is that it's making braking moves and course-correcting moves, like slamming on the brakes and changing direction in ways gravity alone can't explain.
Braking moves, course corrections.
Yeah. This is presented as evidence that it's not a natural celestial body like an asteroid or a comet. Its movement is apparently deliberate and controlled. Artificial.
So potential evidence of both intelligence-laden signals from nearby and an incoming, unnaturally moving massive object further out. That's a lot. How is this astronomical information reportedly being handled? Is it public?
Not according to this source, no. Information about this incoming object and the decoded signal, the city lights imagery, is apparently being sequestered by the DoD and the DIA.
Sequestered, so held back by the Department of Defense and the Defense Intelligence Agency.
That's the claim. It's being withheld from the public.
Even if it's unclassified. Sometimes things are sensitive. They're not technically classified.
That's exactly the point made in the source.
But
they state this information is actually not classified and that people have a right to know this. It echoes some of the sentiments we heard regarding the 2027 predictions, that urgency, that need for transparency.
it sounds like another instance, potentially, of significant information being kept under wraps. Are there any indications that this astronomical information is being discussed at all within official circles, even if not publicly?
Yes, the source suggests there are alleged unclassified briefings happening right now in Congress, specifically about this James Webb discovery.
Unclassified briefings to Congress.
Okay. And these briefings reportedly mention an event they expect based on this data by 2033 and 2034. And the people giving these briefings are described, again, as feeling a level of urgency.
Urgency again. There's that word. We heard it associated with the sources pushing the investigative journalist about 2027, and now it's reportedly coming up in these alleged congressional briefings about potential events in the 2030s.
Yeah, it seems urgency is a common thread running through these different sources, even if the specific timelines they're pointing to differ slightly. 2027, 2030, 32, 2033, 34. There's a definite sense of time pressure conveyed.
Okay, we've explored three distinct, almost jarringly different threads from these sources. The vague but urgent 2027 predictions, the highly detailed alleged military accounts of recent costly encounters, and these reports of astronomical detections being withheld. Now, let's try to, weave these pieces together and see what overall picture emerges from the material itself.
Okay. First, let's put the alleged military reports side by side with some of those 2027 theories. The reports from 2024 and 2025, if accurate, describe actual, specific, costly, hostile encounters with a confirmed extraterrestrial force, real engagements, human casualties.
Right.
This stands in pretty direct contradiction to that circulating idea, presented in some sources, that a potential 2027 alien invasion would be staged or some kind of government hoax. The sources detailing the engagements portrayed a real kinetic threat already present.
That's a fundamental point, yeah. The idea of a staged event seems much less plausible if these documented encounters or something like them are actually real.
Okay.
Now let's reconsider the timelines again. The initial 2024 report estimated the main fleet was 8 to 12 years out, putting it roughly 2032, 2036. But the 2025 report After seeing that second wave arrive so quickly, revised that down significantly to 5 to 7 years out, which lands us around 2030, 2032.
And interestingly, these updated military timelines projecting the main force arrival into the early 2030s align much more closely with the later dates the investigative journalist heard mentioned alongside 2027, like 2034.
Yeah.
They also align pretty well with the time frame mentioned in those alleged James Webb briefings to Congress, discussing an event expected by 2033 and 2034.
So if the most concrete source material we have here, the alleged military reports and the alleged congressional briefings on Webb data, points towards a potential major event or main fleet arrival somewhere in the early 2030s, what does that leave for 2027?
Exactly.
Given the confirmed reality, according to these reports, of hostile encounters and a slightly later estimated timeline for the main force, could the 2027 prediction point to something else? Not the big arrival, but something related.
The sources don't give us a single neat answer, unfortunately, but combining them does suggest possibilities. Could 2027 be related to the escalating nature of the threat? Maybe not the main fleet, but the arrival of an even larger or more significant precursor force. A third wave, maybe, before the main one hits in the 2030s.
That's plausible. Or could it be a critical juncture for public disclosure? With confirmed encounters happening, allegedly, and a larger threat looming in the 2030s, perhaps the secret keepers feel that by 2027 they simply must accelerate public awareness.
Yeah, like an NHI reveal becomes unavoidable. That could be what those sources feeling urgent about the date, despite their oaths, are actually hinting at. Not the event, but the announcement.
That's a compelling possibility that fits the context, the urgency, the constraints. It could also be linked maybe to the potential revelation of those astronomical discoveries, the city light signal, or that incoming object from the Webb data, which are reportedly being withheld now. Perhaps 2027 is a planned or forced date for disclosing that information to the public.
Also possible, or maybe less dramatically, could it just be a critical milestone in the secret defense preparations themselves? What some sources refer to as Project Terra Defensor, this alleged global defense plan. Maybe 2027 is just an internal deadline for reaching a certain level of readiness.
Right.
All of these feel like possibilities derived from trying to reconcile the vague 2027 buzz with the more concrete information about encounters, timelines, and withheld data. It suggests 2027 might not be the main event itself, but perhaps a trigger or a waypoint or a forcing function driven by the underlying reality depicted in the other sources.
And this loops us right back to that pervasive theme of secrecy that runs through all this material, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The deliberate, absolute Geheimhaltung, detailed in the military reports, explicitly designed to prevent panic and control the narrative, provides a pretty clear potential explanation for the vagueness we see elsewhere. The investigative journalist sources, if they are indeed under strict security oaths, are likely revealing the absolute minimum they can without breaking those constraints, which naturally creates information that is frustratingly unclear for the public.
And this seems to mirror the situation described with the reportedly unclassified astronomical data being withheld by the DoD and DIA.
Exactly. The sources, taken together, really highlight this fundamental conflict. The tension between the desire for transparency held by those who feel people have a right to know and the official policy of intense secrecy. The military reports even acknowledge this, labeling it a critical ethical dilemma.
A critical ethical dilemma. What are the stakes, according to these sources? What's the dilemma?
It seems to be a perceived balance between potentially causing widespread panic now by revealing the truth versus leaving humanity dangerously unprepared for a future threat they don't even know exists.
So the vagueness around 2027, the secrecy around the alleged encounters, and the withholding of astronomical data, according to these sources, it all seems to stem from this single deliberate policy of information control. A policy enacted in the face of what is perceived by those in the know as a real and escalating extraterrestrial threat.
That's the picture painted by the sources, yes.
So, bringing it back to you, the listener, why does sifting through all these disparate pieces of information, these different threads, actually matter?
Well, when you put these sources together, they paint a picture where non-human intelligence isn't just, a theoretical concept or something confined to sci-fi or speculative articles. It's portrayed as a potential present reality, one that has allegedly already engaged humanity in hostile, costly encounters.
And these sources strongly suggest that governments and international bodies are aware of this. They're allegedly undertaking massive covert defense preparations, something described as Project Terra Defensor, specifically to counter this perceived threat.
So whether a major event happens exactly in 2027, Or if the timeline aligns more closely with the later dates indicated by the military reports and those alleged astronomical briefings in the 2030s, the sources collectively indicate that significant events related to NHI are anticipated, by some insiders at least, within the coming decade.
Right. And by understanding these different threads, the vague predictions, the concrete military actions detailed in alleged reports, the astronomical data that's reportedly being withheld, the intense secrecy, and those urgent calls for transparency, you, the listener, are better equipped to cut through the noise, assess the potential implications for the near future, based purely on the information contained in these varied sources.
As one source notes specifically regarding the 2027 date, by 2027, people will know if this is real or not, a sort of litmus test. But they also add the important caveat that the goalpost might simply be pushed back, much like discussions around official disclosure sometimes seem to be. It reflects the inherent uncertainty and the clearly evolving nature of this alleged situation as depicted across these different sources. Nothing seems set in stone.
So we've explored the persistent yet ultimately vague predictions centered on 2027. And we've contrasted them sharply with these detailed accounts from alleged leaked reports of recent, costly, real-world military encounters with what's described as a confirmed hostile extraterrestrial force.
We've also touched upon those astronomical detections that may or may not be directly related, but are reportedly being withheld from the public despite allegedly being discussed in government briefings. It's a complex tapestry.
It really is. And while the specific nature of what might unfold in 2027 remains ambiguous based on these sources alone, the broader context they provide suggests a world, or at least parts of its power structure, grappling with a known escalating extraterrestrial presence.
And operating under immense, deliberate secrecy, apparently, to prepare for whatever comes next.
And these sources repeatedly emphasize this urgent need for public knowledge, while also highlighting the profound ethical dilemma of maintaining that secrecy in the face of what's presented as an impending, potentially existential threat.
Yeah.
This leaves us with a significant question to consider, something for you to mull over. In a world allegedly preparing for contact, or even conflict, with a technologically superior force, one that could, as one source put it, render the rules we live by irrelevant, what is the role of informed consent for the public?
That's a big one.
And considering the sheer scope of the alleged ends and preparations described in these sources, how long can secrets of this magnitude truly be kept anyway? Something to think about.